On today's episode of Storytime Audio, we dive into a gripping tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. Shattered trust. The tumultuous journey of a cheating wife and the quest for forgiveness in a fractured family takes you through the highs and lows of Mark and Emily's seemingly perfect life. As we unravel their story, you'll witness the devastating impact of secrets and the powerful journey towards healing. Get ready to immerse yourself in this emotional and compelling narrative that explores the depths of human relationships and the resilience of the human spirit. Mark and Emily had lived a tranquil life for many years, raising their two wonderful sons, Jack and Chris, in the bustling city of Chicago. Mark had been working for a large corporation for many years, steadily climbing the ranks to a high position. With his hard-earned money, he invested significantly in the company's stocks, confident in its future success. Their family enjoyed a life of comfort and luxury, with Emily eventually quitting her job to become a homemaker, indulging in various hobbies and enjoying the lifestyle Mark's income provided. Jack had already finished school and started his own family, while Chris was still completing his education. The family was close-knit, and Mark felt fortunate to have such a supportive and loving family. He often indulged them with gifts and vacations, creating memories that they cherished. However, this idyllic life took a sudden turn when the company Mark worked for began facing severe financial difficulties. The once thriving stocks plummeted, and the company entered an economic crisis. Layoffs and delayed payments became a harsh reality, and Mark's significant investments in the company's shares resulted in substantial losses. One evening, Mark returned home with the somber news that they would need to economize for the foreseeable future. He hoped for understanding and support from Emily, considering her not just his wife but also his friend. However, Emily's reaction was far from supportive. She was visibly upset and disappointed, questioning how they would manage without their accustomed luxuries. "Mark, we were just planning a summer trip. You even scheduled your vacation in advance, and now what? We spent so long choosing our destination, and besides, I've ordered a few things that are supposed to be delivered next week. How can this be? Maybe you can find another job," Emily said, her frustration clear. At that moment, it seemed to Mark that material possessions were more important to Emily than their family. He tried to remind her of their humble beginnings and how they had built their life together through perseverance and joint efforts. "Remember how we started with practically nothing, Emily? Over the years, we've achieved so much together. I'm sure things will get better soon. The most important thing is that we have each other. We'll get through this, just like we always have," Mark said, trying to reassure her. But Emily remained unconvinced. The argument escalated, with Mark eventually leaving the house to clear his head, hoping Emily would have time to think and understand their situation. As he walked through the dimly lit streets of Chicago, he found himself in a desolate alley filled with trash cans and construction debris. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the eerie atmosphere until he heard a weak voice calling for help. Approaching cautiously, Mark found a gaunt and exhausted man, leaning against a wall. The man's clothes were in tatters, and he had a small wound that needed attention. Despite the potential danger, Mark felt compelled to help. The man's face bore a striking resemblance to his old friend Adam, with whom he had served in the military but who had tragically died many years ago. "Hey, how are you? What happened to you?" Mark asked, leaning closer to the man. "Some guys attacked me. I don't have any money. Please, help me," the man replied weakly. Mark helped the man, who introduced himself as John, to his feet and decided to take him to the hospital. Despite John's protests, Mark insisted on getting him medical attention. After ensuring John received the necessary care, Mark stayed with him, wanting to learn more about this stranger who looked so much like his late friend. John shared his story, explaining how he had fallen victim to a scam, lost his job and home, and had been living on the streets ever since. Moved by John's plight, Mark decided not to end his assistance with just a hospital visit. He offered John a place to stay temporarily until he could get back on his feet. When Mark brought John home, Emily was shocked and displeased. "Have you lost your mind, Mark? We're already short on money, and now you're bringing a stranger into our home?" she exclaimed angrily. "Emily, stop it. This man needs help. We can't just turn our backs on him," Mark replied firmly. Reluctantly, Emily prepared a meal while casting spiteful glances at John. Despite the tension, Mark felt a deep connection with John, as if helping him was a way to make up for not being able to save Adam all those years ago. Over the next few days, Mark spent more time with John, getting to know him better and trying to find ways to help him rebuild his life. The days that followed were filled with tension and unease. Emily struggled to accept John's presence in their home, often expressing her dissatisfaction through sharp comments and cold stares. Mark, however, was determined to help John, feeling a deep-seated sense of responsibility and connection to him. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Emily couldn't hold back any longer and finally voiced her frustration. "Mark, we can barely support ourselves right now. How do you expect us to take care of a complete stranger? This is absurd." Mark sighed, trying to keep his patience. "Emily, I understand your concerns, but John needs our help. He has nowhere else to go, and I can't just leave him on the streets. We've been through tough times before, and we managed. We'll get through this too." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. "It's not just about the money, Mark. It's about our family. We've already lost so much, and now you're bringing in someone who could be dangerous. What if he's not who he says he is?" John, who had been quietly eating his meal, looked up with a pained expression. "I understand your worry, Emily. I really do. But I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just need a chance to get back on my feet. I'm truly grateful for Mark's kindness." Emily's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained wary. "Fine, but this is temporary, John. You need to find a job and a place of your own as soon as possible." John nodded, grateful for even this small concession. "I will. Thank you for letting me stay, even if it's just for a little while." Despite the uneasy truce, the household remained tense. Emily's distrust of John lingered, and she often found herself questioning Mark's judgment. Mark, on the other hand, felt torn between his loyalty to his family and his desire to help John. He spent more time with John, learning about his life and trying to find ways to support him. One night, while Emily was out, Mark and John sat by the fireplace, talking about their pasts. John opened up about his struggles, revealing more about the hardship he had faced. Mark listened intently, feeling a growing sense of empathy and connection to John. "I never knew my parents," John admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I grew up in foster homes, always feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. When I finally thought I had a chance to build a life, everything fell apart." Mark's heart ached for John. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that. But you're not alone now. We'll figure this out together." As they continued to talk, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about John. It wasn't just the physical resemblance to Adam. There was a deeper, inexplicable connection. Mark decided it was time to dig deeper into John's background. The next day, Mark reached out to his old friend Kevin, who worked in the police department. Kevin had access to resources that could help uncover John's past. Mark explained the situation, and Kevin agreed to help, though he warned that it might take some time. Meanwhile, Emily's resentment grew. She felt sidelined and ignored, as if Mark was putting John's needs above hers and their family's. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Mark, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She began searching through John's belongings, hoping to find something that would justify her suspicions. What she found shocked her to the core. Hidden among John's few possessions was an old photograph of Adam, Mark, and a woman she recognized as herself, from years ago. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. John was Adam's son, and hers. Emily stumbled back, her mind reeling. Memories she had long buried resurfaced, and she was overwhelmed with guilt and fear. She had thought she could keep this secret forever, but now it was staring her in the face. She had to confront Mark and tell him the truth. That night, as Mark was preparing for bed, Emily approached him, her face pale and eyes filled with dread. "Mark, we need to talk. There's something you need to know about John." Mark looked up, confused by the intensity in her voice. "What is it, Emily?" Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she took a deep breath. "John is Adam's son, and mine. I had an affair with Adam years ago, before we were married. When I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't bear to tell you. I left John in foster care, thinking it was the best thing to do. I never imagined he would find us again." Mark felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. He stared at Emily in disbelief, his mind struggling to process her words. You had an affair with Adam? And you never told me? How could you keep something like this from me?" Emily sobbed, her hands trembling. "I was scared, Mark. I thought I could protect you, protect our family. But now, It's all falling apart." Mark's emotions surged between anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. He turned away, unable to look at Emily. "I need some time to think," he said, his voice cold and distant. As he left the room, Emily crumpled to the floor, her sobs echoing through the house. The truth was out, and the consequences were devastating. The days following Emily's confession were marked by an unbearable tension that hung heavily over the household. Mark, grappling with the betrayal and the overwhelming truth, became distant and withdrawn. He avoided Emily, spending most of his time at work or with John, though now with a heavier heart and a mind full of questions. Meanwhile, Emily was a bundle of nerves. She knew that John had to be told the truth, but the fear of his reaction kept her from confronting him. She avoided him as much as possible, her guilt and shame making it difficult to even look him in the eye. John, on the other hand, sensed the shift in the household dynamics. He noticed the strained interactions between Mark and Emily, and the way Emily seemed to avoid him. His curiosity was piqued, and he couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something crucial he wasn't being told. One evening, as Mark sat in the living room, lost in thought, John approached him. "Mark, I need to talk to you. Something's been bothering me. What's going on? Why is Emily acting so strange around me?" Mark looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and determination. He knew he couldn't keep John in the dark any longer. Taking a deep breath, he decided to tell John the truth. "John, there's something you need to know. It's about your past, about who you really are." John's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Emily? Emily is your mother, and Adam was your father," Mark said, his voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. John stared at Mark, stunned. He felt as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. "What? That can't be true. My mother abandoned me. She would never. Emily would never." Mark placed a comforting hand on John's shoulder. "I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. Emily had an affair with Adam before we were married. When she found out she was pregnant, she left you in foster care, thinking it was the best way to protect everyone." The room fell into a heavy silence as John tried to process this earth-shattering information. His initial shock quickly turned to anger and betrayal. He stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. "Why didn't she tell me? Why did she lie to me all these years?" At that moment, Emily entered the room, her face pale and eyes red from crying. She had overheard the conversation and knew it was time to face her son. "John, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping the truth from you." John turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. How could you abandon me and then pretend like I didn't exist?" Emily took a step forward, her hands trembling. "I was scared, John. I was young and made a terrible mistake. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was wrong. I've regretted it every day since." John shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "You don't get to play the victim here. You abandoned me. You left me to fend for myself. How am I supposed to forgive you for that?" Emily broke down, falling to her knees. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, believe me when I say I'm sorry. I never stopped thinking about you, and I never stopped loving you." Mark watched the heartbreaking scene unfold, feeling a deep sadness for both John and Emily. He stood up, his expression stern yet compassionate. "John, I know this is hard to take in, but Emily is still your mother, and despite her mistakes, she's been living with this guilt for years. We need to find a way to move forward from this, together." John looked at Mark, his anger slowly giving way to a painful acceptance. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her, but I guess I need time to figure things out." Over the next few days, the household remained tense. John avoided Emily, unable to face her without feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. Mark, torn between his love for Emily and his loyalty to John, tried to mediate, hoping to find a way to heal their fractured family. One evening, Mark called a family meeting. He knew they couldn't continue living like this. They needed to confront their issues head-on if they ever hoped to find peace. As they all sat down in the living room, Mark began to speak. "We can't keep going on like this. We need to talk about what happened and find a way to move forward. Emily, John, you both need to say what's on your minds." Emily, her eyes filled with tears, spoke first. "John, I know I've made unforgivable mistakes, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've regretted it every day. I understand if you can't forgive me, but please, give me a chance to make things right." John, his voice heavy with emotion, replied, "It's not that easy, Emily. You left me to suffer, and now you expect me to just forgive and forget? I don't know if I can do that." Mark intervened, his voice calm but firm. "No one is asking you to forgive and forget immediately, John. But we need to start somewhere. We need to try to understand each other and heal." Over the next few weeks, the family slowly began to rebuild their relationships. Emily and John had long, painful conversations about the past, their anger and hurt gradually giving way to understanding and a tentative forgiveness. Mark supported them both, acting as a bridge between his wife and his newfound son. In time, John started to see Emily not just as the mother who abandoned him, but as a woman who had made mistakes and was genuinely remorseful. Emily, for her part, worked tirelessly to show John that she was committed to being a part of his life, no matter how long it took for him to accept her. Mark, watching his family slowly heal, felt a sense of hope. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in a long while, he felt that they were moving in the right direction. They were no longer living in the shadows of their past mistakes but were instead striving to build a future together, one step at a time. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over the household was shattered one evening when Mark stumbled upon an unsettling discovery. He had been working late, trying to catch up on some projects, and returned home unexpectedly early. As he approached the house, he noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway. His heart sank, a gnawing sense of dread creeping up his spine. Mark quietly entered the house, moving stealthily towards the living room. His worst fears were confirmed when he saw Emily in the arms of another man, their intimate whispers and laughter echoing painfully in his ears. Rage and betrayal surged through him, and he stepped forward, unable to contain his fury. "Emily, what the hell is going on here?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and hurt. Emily and the stranger sprang apart, their faces a picture of shock and guilt. The man, dressed in nothing but an expensive robe, tried to make a hasty exit, but Mark blocked his path. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" Mark demanded. The man stammered, trying to justify himself. I didn't know she was married. I'm just a friend." Emily, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to intervene. "Mark, please, let me explain. It's not what it looks like." But Mark was beyond reasoning. "Not what it looks like? You think I'm a fool, Emily? I trusted you, despite everything, and this is how you repay me. Get out of my house, both of you." The man quickly gathered his belongings and left, not wanting to be caught in the escalating confrontation. Emily, tears streaming down her face, pleaded with Mark. "Please, Mark, let me explain. I made a mistake, but it was never meant to hurt you. I was feeling lost and alone." Mark's face hardened. "Lost and alone? We were trying to rebuild our family, Emily. And this is how you repay me? I can't even look at you right now. Pack your things and leave. I don't want to see you here again." Emily, devastated, tried one last time. "Mark, what about the boys? What about John?" Mark's voice was icy. "The boys will understand. As for John, he deserves to know the truth about what kind of person you really are. Now, get out." Emily, broken and defeated, packed her things and left the house. Mark watched her go, his heart heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow. He felt betrayed, not just by Emily, but by the entire situation that had led them to this point. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Mark struggled to keep his emotions in check, especially around John and his sons, Jack and Chris. He knew he had to tell them the truth about what had happened, but he dreaded the impact it would have on their already strained family. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Mark decided it was time. "Boys, there's something you need to know," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Your mother, she's been unfaithful. I found her with another man, and I asked her to leave." Jack and Chris exchanged shocked glances, their faces a mix of disbelief and sorrow. John, who had been quiet and withdrawn since learning the truth about his parentage, looked up with a pained expression. "Mark, I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted any of this to happen." Mark nodded, appreciating John's empathy. "I know, John, none of this is your fault. We're all trying to navigate through this mess, but we need to stick together." In the days that followed, Emily tried to reach out to Mark and the boys, but her attempts were met with cold silence. She found herself increasingly isolated, and her mental state began to deteriorate. John, harboring a deep-seated resentment towards Emily for abandoning him, found it difficult to reconcile his feelings. The anger and betrayal festered within him, leading him down a dark path. One night, driven by his unresolved anger and pain, John made a fateful decision. He found Emily's new address and went to confront her. The confrontation quickly escalated, and in a fit of rage, John poisoned Emily's drink, his mind clouded with thoughts of revenge. Emily, unaware of John's intentions, invited him in, hoping to mend their broken relationship. They talked, and for a moment, it seemed like they might find some common ground. But as Emily sipped her drink, she suddenly clutched her throat, gasping for air. Panic set in as the realization of what was happening dawned on her. "John, what have you done?" she managed to choke out before collapsing to the floor. John watched in horror as Emily convulsed, his anger quickly turning to regret. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he muttered, frozen in place. Meanwhile, back at home, Mark and the boys were unaware of the unfolding tragedy. It wasn't until the next morning that they received the devastating news. Emily had been found dead in her apartment, and the police were investigating her death as a homicide. Jack and Chris were devastated by the news. Despite the recent turmoil, Emily was still their mother, and losing her in such a violent way was unbearable. Mark, struggling to hold his family together, had to face the reality of what had happened. The police quickly traced the crime back to John. The evidence was overwhelming, and John was arrested and charged with Emily's murder. As the truth came to light, the full weight of the tragedy descended upon the family. Jack and Chris were left to grapple with the loss of their mother and the realization that their newfound brother had been responsible for her death. The sense of betrayal and confusion was almost too much to bear. Mark, heartbroken and feeling the weight of his family's destruction, visited John in prison. He needed to understand why things had spiraled so far out of control. "Why, John, why did you do it?" Mark asked, his voice filled with anguish. John, his face a mask of remorse, replied, "I was so angry, Mark. I felt betrayed and abandoned. I thought hurting her would make me feel better, but it didn't. I've destroyed everything, and I'm so sorry." Mark nodded, tears in his eyes. "You've hurt a lot of people, John. But I still believe there's a chance for redemption. It's not too late to make amends for what you've done." John nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll try, Mark. I'll try to make things right, even if it takes the rest of my life." The family, shattered by the events, began the slow and painful process of healing. Mark focused on supporting Jack and Chris, helping them navigate their grief and anger. He knew that their journey would be long and difficult, but he was determined to help them find a way forward. In the end, the story of Mark, Emily, and John was one of profound loss and redemption. The tragedy that befell their family served as a stark reminder of the consequences of betrayal and the power of forgiveness. Though the scars would never fully heal, they learned to move forward, carrying the memory of Emily with them as they rebuilt their lives, one day at a time. Thank you for tuning into Storytime Audio, for the emotional journey of shattered trust, the tumultuous journey of a cheating wife and the quest for forgiveness in a fractured family. As we conclude this tale, we reflect on the powerful themes of betrayal, loss, and the enduring strength of forgiveness. Mark, Emily, and John's story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there's a path to healing and redemption. Stay with us for more stories that delve deep into the human experience, revealing the complex emotions that shape our lives. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt narratives. Until next time, keep exploring the depths of every story.